When we start reasoning and using logic, the very first thing we do is we tend to drop into doubt. And then we doubt the process, we doubt ourselves, we doubt our capacity, and then we just get stuck in that cycle of maybe, doubt, maybe, oh, maybe it could be, no, it won't. And we get stuck in that doubt, which is why this is why storytelling and creativity is such a powerful tool in that transformational journey.
What if the truth came in a gel cap and we could just pop it in our mouths and forget about it? Well, it doesn't, and we can't. But we can laugh in the face of reality while plotting our survival. Welcome to the Truth Tastes Funny podcast. I am your host, Hersh Rephun, and if my guests can handle the truth, so can you. Open wide, folks. Here it comes. My guest today on Truth Tastes Funny is Dr. Karen Parker, PhD. She is an international Amazon best-selling author. She's written multiple books on personal transformation, spirituality, and human design. And if you've been listening to the show, you know these are subjects that interest me. She's the creator of the Quantum Human Design and the Quantum Alignment System, speaking, coaching, training, podcasting on these and other topics. For 30 plus years, she impacts lives daily, worldwide. Dr. Karen's core mission is to help people connect with their natural creativity, manifest their desires effectively, consciously use the frequency of language and the narrative to craft a life that best serves themselves and adds more love and joy to the world. She holds a PhD in integrative medicine. I said interrogative medicine. That's funny. It's integrative medicine, but but she's welcome to interrogate us on the subject of medicine and is working on multiple new books. She's a faculty member at the Shift Network and Omega Institute. Welcome, Dr. Karen Parker, to the Truth Tastes Funny podcast.
Thank you. I think my kids think I'm an expert in interrogative medicine. My teenager.
Yes. Yeah. I have a teenager. I have three grown ones, and then I have a tween. So preteen. So I don't know. I feel with the younger two that I am definitely in the position of interrogating them versus just talking.
Yeah.
Just asking a question, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, listen, let's start with where it started for you. I'm curious to know, I've spoken to you before, but I don't know your origin story. I don't always ask the guests to share it, but in this case, I think it would set us up for a more interesting conversation.
Well, it's a long origin story because I'm old, but I'll start at the beginning and then I'll skip decades as we go along. So I'll say my real origin story started when I graduated from college. I worked as a midwife for several years, and I started to notice in my practice that I could kind of predict who was going to have an easy birth and who was going to have complications and challenges. And it really kind of all boiled down to what story were they telling about themselves, their power? And oftentimes it was stories about control or feeling out of control or needing to be in control. I didn't work for very long as a midwife because, like you, I had a lot of kids. I have 8 kids. And at a certain point, it got really hard to bring babies to births. And so I switched careers and became a life coach in 1998. And as I worked in life coaching, I started to see a similar trend that I could almost tell in the stories that people were telling about themselves, the way they talked about themselves, the history of how they interpreted experiences in their life. I could tell how their story was really impacting core areas of their lives, like money, relationships, their health and wellness. And that really stuck in my head. It really just kind of programmed me to start listening kind of intuitively from a gut level and sort of from a pattern level. And somewhere along the way, I encountered, not somewhere along the way, in 1999, I encountered human design, or I'll say it found me. And in my understanding of human design and my studies of human design, I realized that this system, which is a personality assessment system that's a synthesis of Eastern and Western astrology, the Chinese I Ching, the Hindu chakra system, Judaic Kabbalah, and quantum physics, which basically what it really is just a synthesis of ancient and modern archetypes, that
Right.
this tool could be used to very systematically explore somebody's story. You know, we say a lot of times in the personal growth and development field, you've probably heard it. We say, well, you just need to shift your mindset, or you just need to tell a different story.
Sure.
And it's like, that's great, but where exactly do you start targeting reframing the narrative? And so using human design, I kind of cultivated this way of kind of taking this tool and systematically exploring with my clients, how do you begin to rewrite the story you're telling about who you are and how you are?
Yeah. Um, and I tried, I just feel like it's helpful for me to share this. When the COVID hit, I had the opportunity to do some personal work, some personal development work, which as a busy, entrepreneur, business owner, parent, um, it was hard for me to work on myself that way. And I think that um, part of the fear was, well, what if it's all intellectual? What if everything is intellectual
Mhm.
and I don't really fix anything because I don't know that it can be fixed intellectually. I understand certain things intellectually about my past, and it's not very traumatic, thankfully, and it's not incredibly, hard to figure out, but it's like, well, what if understanding it isn't enough? And that's where I discovered, human design and the quantum field. But um, so what is your favorite part of what you do?
My favorite part, that I love that you asked that. Nobody asked me that. So
Yeah.
here's my favorite part. I love walking a person through their chart and looking at the human design chart as a storytelling tool and showing them, here are the different layers in your story, having them see, oh my gosh, here's the old story I've been telling. This is why I interpreted this event this way. This is how it impacted me. This is how it's shifted the way that I interact with the world in a way that holds me back. I like to watch them decode that story and then recode that story in a way so that the story they begin to step into is a story that is a story of empowered growth, a story of possibility, a story where they shed and let go of the old patterns that they've cultivated. And really, essentially, they move from creating from a place of fear and reactivity into a place of intentionality and faith.
Well, there's one thing there that's worth unpacking in detail, which is you have to, in a way, replace one thing with another. It
Mhm.
isn't enough to say, well, I have a bad attitude about money. I think everyone, like, this is something from my childhood, that seeing a lot of wealthy people and getting the impression that they must be doing something illicit, that they must be, because in some cases people were, and then those kind of stick with you. If somebody does something bad and they're very wealthy, then that kind of sticks with you, as opposed to, getting the feeling that was an exception or whatever it might be. But you got to replace that with a different belief if that belief turns out to be misplaced. Where do you start in the process uh, of replacing ideas?
I love this question because it's not a simple answer. And I have to say, and this is maybe bad news, but there isn't a hack. And I think
Mm,
that's the piece we have to really embrace, that to recode the story isn't something you're going to do in a nanosecond. And it isn't something that's going to happen overnight. It takes practice. And part of why it takes practice is you have to not only change your mindset, but you also have to rewire your nervous system and really integrate into the body the new story. So let's go back and talk about money for a minute. Money is a supercharged topic. And it's a supercharged topic for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons being, in our culture right now, your personal value is to a certain degree, at least in the collective, measured by how much money you have, right? We measure value with numbers. And we
Hmm.
measure personal value with how much money do you have? How many numbers do you have in your life? How much stuff do you have? And so when we struggle with money, it's not just about the money, it's about our self worth and our value and our worthiness and our deservedness and our capacity to have. Now, if you have a money story that's limiting, which many people do, so if that's you, please don't feel like you're the only one. This is probably a bulk of what I work with in my clients. When you have a story about money, first of all, we have to remember that story usually has a long ancestral lineage. If you think about the fact that the codes that we have for how we experience and interpret the world are held within our bodies on a cellular level, and we know now from the science of epigenetics that we can hold up to 14 generations of memory on our cells, really literally regulating how our DNA operates. Well, you start to do the math, the odds are pretty high that most of us are going to have some kind of lineage that has money issues, particularly if we even just look at the last 150 years, right? In the United States, we've had the Great Depression, we had World War II, we had World War One, we had, there's a lot of history there about money and poverty and money and well-being. And that's in you. Even if you don't actively think about it from that lens, it's still in you. And that's the first thing we have to realize, that we've got to recode the body. And part of recoding the body is also creating within the body a sense of safety. Because for a lot of us, when we see money out in the world or you see a bill, right, it triggers a fight or flight response, an anxiety response, a stress response. And so the body starts associating, safety and fear with money, the archetype of money. And you think about it, it's really kind of a neutral thing. It's just an exchange of value, but we give it all
Right.
its meaning, right? So
Right.
to make those changes, yeah, you have to change your mindset. Yes, you have to change your story. And primarily, most of the time when we work with people on changing their story, you literally have to change your internal story about who you are, but you also have to repattern the body and you have to repattern the nervous system. And that does take time, because the body, and especially the nervous system, it's a patterned system. It's a system that shifts with repetition and consistency. And so you can't just say, okay, I'm going to say this affirmation and poof, voila, my whole life is going to change. You obviously, the affirmation is important. It's the seed, but you have to repeat it. And you have to consistently take the time to reassure and really get back into the body and tell the body money is safe. It's not just the affirmation, but really reassuring the body on a somatic level that money can be safe and that you can literally feel this new identity being born into you. And part of what we have to work on when we make these shifts isn't just doing the cognitive work, but actually getting back into, who do I need to be rich or to be abundant? And how does that feel in my body? Who does that person, or what does that person feel like in my body? And when I feel that new identity, and oftentimes when we feel that new identity, it triggers old anxiety, right? It'll trigger that old pattern. Then you have to go in and really work with reassuring the body that no, it's safe. It's safe to be this person. It's safe to have this identity. It's safe to have money, and I'm okay. And that process of repetitive shifts and consistency begins to make these changes. And of course, when you make these changes that way, when you tackle it at that depth, then the changes that you make are permanent. Which I think for most of us, we get little vestiges of, oh, I have this like little tiny breakthrough. But if you go back out and you haven't shifted the body yet, and now you encounter something like a tax bill, right? Or something,
Yeah.
it's going to immediately kick you back into that old patterning in the body, in that physiological place, in that neurological place. And so you have to really do that integrated approach and do it over time to get permanent shifts. And of course, then you get yourself out of those boom and bust cycles and those fear and anxiety patterns that come with whatever it is you're starting to shift.
Yeah. And you, the way you framed it, about it taking time and having to take hold is maybe a better way of looking at it than what I had said about intellect, because what you're pointing out is, you have to give these ideas the repetition and the time to take hold. And so figuring it out or having the epiphany
Mm-hmm.
doesn't, like, because I had in my mind, oh, the epiphany, like when you watch, psychologists and things like that. If you watch the movie Ordinary People, remember,
Yeah, yeah.
you might think, oh, it's about an epiphany or a release. And as soon as that happens, everything's going to be better, you
Yeah.
know?
No.
And and in fact, that really is not the case. So it isn't even so much, I would say now, an intellectual question as it is a fundamental transformation that has to take place,
Mhm.
um, where you really do see things differently. But because you mentioned it can go back, you can be looking at 10, 15 generations of imprinting that's happened on your genetically and
Mhm.
on who you are, right? How do you approach that without people losing the scientific thread and starting to feel like they're spinning off
Mm.
into, woo territory, for lack of a better word, because they're dealing with something that seems further and further removed from their present circumstance?
Well, you're looking at coding. And so you can change coding in the now. You don't have to go on a detective hunt to figure out which one of my relatives left this stain on my cells, right? You don't have to,
Hmm.
you can still recode it in the moment. And I want to address a couple of things that you said that I think are really important. And I'll build on that. Number one, the figuring out thing is important. It is part of decoding. You really have to decode and recode. And the epiphany is huge. That's the seed, right? But if we only are figuring it out, if we only have the epiphany and we don't go beyond that recode into that recoding process, it sets us up to be like, wow, I have this huge awareness. And you go out into the world, but then you encounter something that re-triggers you, and then you start to feel like a failure, which is something I think is we see in the personal growth and development community. All these people who say, well, I know how to manifest, but I just can't seem to do it, or I know how to create, but I just can't seem to do it, or I know how to think positive and I can't. It's not that you can't, it's that you've seen the beginning, you've been seeded, but you have to let that seed grow. And part of that growing process is that recoding piece. And when we try to recode by figuring out, we tend to default into the logical reasoning part of our brain. And if you really think about logic and reasoning, we go back to the scientific method, which is really the archetype of logic and reasoning. Well, the scientific methodology starts with doubt, right? You have a
Hmm.
hypothesis. It has to be proven to be true or disproven. And so when we start reasoning and using logic, the very first thing we do is we tend to drop into doubt. And then we doubt the process, we doubt ourselves, we doubt our capacity, and then we just get stuck in that cycle of maybe, doubt, maybe, oh, maybe it could be, no, it won't. And we get stuck in that doubt, which is why this is why storytelling and creativity is such a powerful tool in that transformational journey. Because yes, you have to recondition and recode the body, but you also have to recode your thinking. And doing it with logic and reasoning isn't always the best entrance point into shifting the narrative. And so, one of the things that I've learned through my research is that when we go over to the right side of the brain, and of course, it's not really right and left, we teach it that way, but if we move into that sensual, creative, emotional storytelling part of our nervous system, well, that part of our nervous system exists out of time. In fact, think about when we tell stories to kids, we say once upon a time, right? There's no really time that happens. So we can go
Right.
outside of time. We can liberate ourselves from the time when it's been happening to us. And then we can pull in all this creativity, all this play, all this conscious and intentional rewriting of our narrative in all kinds of really juicy and delicious ways. And when we rewrite that story over here, instead of figuring it out, what we actually do is make it easier for the brain to integrate the new story because now the brain's not resisting it because of doubt and suspicion. The brain, which in and of itself is just a meaning making machine, really thinks in metaphors and stories anyway. So you're just feeding it a new story. And in reality, the brain doesn't really know the difference between a fantastical story where all of a sudden money comes to you every day in the mail and fairies drop, money bombs on your house versus you over here figuring out, I don't know what to do with my money. I don't know how to manage it. I don't know how to make it last until retirement. I can't make it. That creative part of your brain can actually be a very healing part of integrating a new narrative into your whole system.
Well, as you're talking about money, and you had mentioned earlier, money essentially that money has no feelings about itself. Money
It's
has
true.
no attitude, right, about itself. But we have attitudes about it, and that and that affects us. But as we're trying to affect change in our lives,
Mm.
um, what role do other people play in this process? Because this is a that's a another angle, which is I can do all the work that you and I are talking about,
Mhm.
but do the people in my life support what I'm doing? Am I influenced by my siblings or children's understandings of history or whatever has happened? How much of that, I don't want to even call it just noise, how much of those relationships play a part in the work that we do personally?
Well, they play a big part. And again, this is another reason why I personally love human design, because one of the things that human design shows us is where do you take energy in from the world around you, from your relationships, from your partnerships, from your friendships. And we all receive energy differently, and we all have different energies that we put out into the world. And when you can start to understand, say, for example, I'm an emotional empath, maybe that's what your chart shows, that you take in emotional energy. Well, we start to understand that, we start to realize, well, people who are emotionally empathic, they tend to have people pleasing patterns, right? They want to control the emotional energy in the room. And so they learn to put aside what they want and need, and to instead, be happy and be kind and be the one that makes everybody in the room just have everything that they need. And that dynamic can actually A, play into your money story, and B, it starts to give you important clues as to how you self-regulate, because ultimately, whether you're an empath or not, and we're all empathic in some way or shape or form, as you said, we're all influenced by the people around us, we're designed to be. When you
Yes.
understand how you're influenced, then you start to be able to say, okay, I'm an emotional empath. That means when I walk into a room and there's something going on that's emotional, I'm going to take it in and I'm going to feel it. My job now, my growth edge, my soul curriculum, if you will, is to learn how to self regulate my emotions no matter what's going on around me, to learn how to hold on to my faith no matter what anybody says or does, no matter what anybody says, even if anybody's judging me. You learn eventually, when you start to decode your chart and recode your story, you start to give yourself awareness to be able to know, okay, I'm gonna walk into this dodgy situation. My pattern is to people please. My pattern is to let the emotional energy shut me down. I'm going to learn to walk into this space and to not let what's going on around me stop me from my own creative flow.
Mm. With human design, um, one of the things that I noticed, and again, I didn't delve into it very deeply, but it is one of those things where it's very easy to pique your curiosity about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was speaking with someone who is quite engaged in it, and I guess she ran my chart, or we did, she did some poking around, and one of the things that I remember experiencing was that uh, my first reaction was, "Oh, that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That's wrong. That's not what she's getting my personality wrong.
Mm-hmm.
She's getting my role in business. She's it's off. Something's off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, because I think I had deeply attached myself to certain roles.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Mm-hmm.
was only when I let go of those roles, and it wasn't through, like, again, I didn't pursue it, but every conversation, especially if you're listening or paying attention, or you're conscious at all, has an impact or opens a door. It may be just a little bit, um, but it made me question my attachment to certain roles that I was playing, and how do you think it is, Karen, um, that we sometimes resist what really should be the path of least resistance? In other words, it should be the most natural thing. Because once I let things sit, I was like, yeah, I'm taking on all kinds of things that I'm not really designed to do. I think that I am. So how do we come to our senses? What is the process?
Well, I think first of all, your experience with your human design chart is not uncommon, because oftentimes we have built what I'll call a protective identity, which I suspect you built a protective identity, particularly I'll say as a male in our culture, right?
Hmm.
When you start talking about proving your worth, proving your value in business, there's a relationship between being successful in business and, all of there's a whole huge narrative that's not just a human design narrative, it's a cultural narrative. And at the root, probably in your human design, there's a part of you that is driven to prove your value. That's a shadow theme. And again, awareness is oftentimes a very great place to start. You got that awareness seed and you were able to sit and think about it. But I think the other piece that human design offers is it actually is a prescription to help you get back into your body. So your human design chart, and this is dependent on how your chart is configured because everybody's chart is different. Your chart will tell you a lot about what do you need to do to actually get back in your body and start trusting your visceral physical response to life. Most of us have learned to disconnect from the wisdom of our body. And part of what we have to do if we're going to start making a different set of decisions around something as simple as your value in the world is you have to start remembering, okay, what does right feel like in my body? Because most of us are
Hmm.
making decisions in our head, right? Oh, I think
Yeah.
this, I think I should do that. But when we start to drop into the body and we say, okay, what does right feel like in my body? What does not right feel like in my body? And really trusting that, then we start to make a different set of choices. And again, this goes back to I'm sorry to report, you can't shift this stuff instantly unless you have, like, maybe a near death experience. Sometimes that works, but don't do that, right? That you really have to then practice trusting and rebuilding your relationship with your body, your relationship with your intuitive gut, whatever, your sense, and begin to start making a different set of choices. For example, let's say in relation to money and business and your business identity. You probably have this intuitive sense of, I should do this for my business, or you're a podcast host. I should have this person on my podcast. This feels like, this would be right. And when you start to follow that, then what happens is this new path begins to unfold choice by choice by choice. And as that path begins to unfold, you start to take yourself into a different place where some of those more hurtful, limiting dynamics almost naturally begin to heal themselves experientially from the creation of a different experience of the world through a different lens because you've been making different choices now.
Yeah. Um, and I want to ask one more question that I'll kind of let you take wherever you want to take it. And
Okay.
this could be your last word on the episode. But essentially, if if we are in a world today where there's so much dividing people,
Mm-hmm.
there's so much polarization,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean that like across the board. There's just we could just as easily ascribe it to there's so much information out there. No two people are going to have the same perspective anymore, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So you could even just look at it as simply as that. But if we say there's so much polarization that it is very challenging to progress because we're constantly combated by other points of view,
Mm-hmm.
that and in a way that feels aggressive. So if someone in today's world wants to progress and develop their their personality, their life, the quality of their experience on Earth, but are just hit by so many inputs that it can become a little bit debilitating.
Mm-hmm.
How do you recommend that in our daily lives we forge ahead and progress in spite of the external inhibitors that abound?
I love that. And so, first of all, I would say deconditioning our inner polarization is probably the most important work we need to be doing collectively and individually. And that is in and of itself a whole nother podcast episode. Um, because it's a larger issue and a lot of it has to do with where we are, I think, in the evolution of consciousness. But I'll go back to the basics of answering that question in the way that I answered it previously. When you are connected to your authentic self, to your own natural decision making energy, to with what feels good and right in your body for you, you eventually start to heal your self worth, which I think is the most important thing for us to be working on individually for the sake of not only our own lives, but for the sake of the collective. When you start to live in such a way that you see the fulfillment of your authentic self in your life, in your relationships, in your money, in your work, which happens again, choice by choice by choice, getting back in touch with that inner decision making capacity, then you start to recognize, oh, I'm pretty special. I'm really this, once in a lifetime cosmic event. There literally is no one else like me in this whole world. Well, that awareness becomes a pivotal awareness, because when you start to recognize, oh, there's nobody like me, and I'm like the hope diamond, right? I'm something really, really precious. Well, you can't be precious by yourself. You're not you start to realize, oh, well, if I'm precious, then so are you. And so is that person and that person and that person. And in fact, we're this conglomerate of all of these precious entities. And now when you're standing in your own value and you recognize there's no one else like me, who are you competing with? Oh wait, no one, because there's no one to compete with, right?
Right,
You're
right.
standing in your own inner enoughness. And when you're holding that place of your own inner enoughness and you're holding that same place for other people, now we start making a whole different set of collective decisions. Now, when a child is born in Africa or Gaza or Israel or wherever, right? Now, when a child is born anywhere on the planet, that's the birth of something precious. And now all of a sudden, we can't just turn a blind eye and say, that's not happening. I don't care. What does that have to do with me? It has everything to do with you because they are us, right? They are
Hmm.
us. And now we start saying, okay, all children on the planet need to be well fed and cared for and nurtured. They need education, they need safety, they need families and communities that support and nurture them. We become stewards of these precious beings that are born into the world because now we understand the inherent value of every human on the planet. We are all
Yeah.
inherently valuable because we exist, and that's the state that we must return to if we're going to keep moving forward.
Yeah, I love that because that's the way of saying, we are not identical. We are not equal because we're identical. We're equal because we're unique.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody having their DNA and that's what I tell clients in the branding space also. The things that you may discount as, you know, irrelevant differentiators are really quite likely the differentiators that make all the difference, because it's all those pieces that are different from other people that make you special and make your experience different from, one person went to Harvard, another person went to Harvard, one person grew up in this place, another one grew up in this. There are enough things that are alike that we can focus on the things that are truly special, because um, as you say, those are the things that bring us together,
Mm-hmm.
not the differentiators. Well, this has been wonderful, Karen. I would love to hear I would love to hear what else you have going on this year, what you have planned for this year, where people can find you.
Absolutely. So you can find me on Instagram and Facebook, Dr. Karen Parker 22, or on YouTube, Dr. Karen Parker. You can find us on our website, quantumhumandesign.com. And when you go there, you can actually get a free human design chart with a little report. So if you're curious about human design, it's a great place to start. If you want to really look at how do you intentionally use human design as a storytelling tool, I have a new book out called Quantum Wellness. It's available on all kinds of book retail outlets that walks you systematically through the layers of your chart. I'll be live at Omega in May on Memorial Day weekend doing a story lab, which is a process of walking through telling the story of your chart. And I've got two new books coming out this year. One is called Healing the Witch Wound, that's coming out in September, and another book called Manifesting by Design, that's coming out in November of this year.
That's fantastic. Wow. Well, you certainly are keeping busy, and I appreciate you making the time. And have a wonderful 2026. Let's see what we can each accomplish in our own design.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning into Truth Tastes Funny. If you enjoyed the experience, please leave a 5-star review and share this podcast with your friends.